Welcome to another Outer Inner Space transmission. This video is about Saturn and money. And I know typically in astrology we don't really correlate Saturn with money, but I'm sure you've all heard of the phrase, time is money. Well, Saturn rules time, and I think it's really important to make a correlation between these two ideas because Saturn has everything to do with energy management and alignment and embodying lessons. And I think that with the world financial system changing as it is, and a lot of people confused about what to do or where to invest or how things are going to change and preparing for that and trying to get themselves in a secure position so that they're not scared, essentially, it is worth having a look at some of these ideas because energy is currency, and the way that you spend your energy and the way that you direct your focus is going to determine financial reimbursement, essentially. And one of the key points that I'll make throughout this video is that Saturn has everything to do with integrity, and if you're operating outside of integrity, there's no long-term sustainability in that, and that's what Saturn is here to teach us. And so the ideas presented in this video are for you to consider and overlay onto your own perspective, and I hope there's something here for you. So the first thing I'll touch on is how Saturn wants us to be in integrity. And integrity is to integrate mind, body, and spirit. So your mind would be your conscious attention, what you're thinking about, what you're planning. It's based on past experience in a sense because it's everything that you've learnt but are consciously aware of and how you make future decisions based on those past experiences. The body would be your unconscious programming. It's all the energy that you've absorbed and stored. So this would be things about early childhood imprinting about your beliefs about money and how that has a effect on how you move in the world. For example, the idea that you need to work really hard to be successful might have been imprinted in you, and so you can't rest because if you're at rest, then you feel like you're not doing everything you can to get your needs met or build financial security. Whereas we're coming to learn now that alignment is so much more effective than constant productivity. And this patterning gets stored in the body, and I'll talk about this more a little bit later. And then we've got our spirit, so our connection to the superconsciousness, the connection to the divine, the connection to the web of potential that links all of us, and the connection to infinite ideas and divine inspiration. So to be in integrity is to have our mind, body, and spirit, our consciousness, our subconscious, and the superconscious all working in harmony. But what happens for most of us is we're too much in our heads or we're too much in reactivity, our body. And when we've got this conflict going on between our head and our body, or our conscious processing or our subconscious processing, there's this conflict, and in that we're in this really high beta range, and there's no room for that super consciousness to come in, for the divine inspiration to provide us with the solutions that are there but we can't see because we're stressed or we're worried or we're freaking out. So to be in integrity is to get all these components working in harmony, and I'll talk about output, input, and the space between shortly as a method of pulling back the gears and getting these components working in harmony. But the thing about Saturn is that when we're out of integrity is when we make these reactive decisions, when we get ourselves into positions that we lose money on, we waste time on, or they don't pay off because they're not in alignment with what our real values are. So this is why it's important to look at our Saturn position, our natal Saturn in our own chart, and also where Saturn is transiting for everyone when it comes to money, because it has to do with time and they're inextricably linked. So one of the reasons that I'm doing this video, or I was inspired to do this video, was because I read this book called The Compound Effect by a man named Darren Hardy. And it's not a book about astrology or Saturn, but it has heaps of Saturnian themes in it, in the sense that it's talking about the compound effect, where over time, the choices you make, the investments you make, the small, repetitive and consistent actions that you make compound over time. And that's what differentiates a life that's ordinary from a life that's extraordinary by your own standards, where you're putting in investments in what is valuable to you over time, these really little details, these small action steps, or these small acts of alignment, which compound over time. And one of the things while I was reading the book that made me think this is really amazing and really Saturnian is that you don't get any applause for these kinds of actions. Like, there's no fanfare. It's really unsexy. There's no immediate gratification that you get from making these choices. But it's the knowing that as time goes on, you're going to start to see the benefits. And it will be a matter of, you might not see it after 6 months or 12 months, but on that 13th month or on that 25th month, then the results become really significant and really huge. And this is what Saturn does, is he rewards over time when you're moving in alignment. And so one of the things that I talk a lot about in my videos, especially the Chart Rulers series, is that we need to find our own sense of timing and our own authentic frequency, because more often than not, we are so conditioned to operate in this sense of urgency, in this sense of fear, which asks us to act really quickly, and in that FOMO kind of frame of mind, where we haven't measured this against what is actually a true vibration for us. And that's when we start to create these paths that lead to nowhere and set us back, in a sense. If you just look at a few of these constructs in our society today, like you need to be a certain place by a certain age, or have a certain job by a certain age, that's Saturnian energy. Or having a certain amount of money by a certain age, or having purchased a house by a certain age, that's Saturnian energy. But it's misconstrued, it's misrepresented. It's a social construct. Also, the idea of how long it takes for something to eventuate into its full maturity, like that has to do with Saturn as well. So that can go for your own self or your creative projects or your business. So I guess the idea of the compound effect and what I'm trying to convey here in this video is that there's a sense of pacing yourself involved in this. And when you can work out what is really true for you and your own pace and your own speed, and not measure it against those social constructs of where you're supposed to be by a certain age or society's measure of success, but instead finding that harmony between mind, body and spirit, and then making your moves from that place, and using Saturn energy to make that transition, so it's not, and using Saturn energy Uranian pivot, but something that you can really make long term. That's when you can start to alter your energetic output, and therefore alter what you receive back in terms of reimbursement and financial security. And one of the things with Saturn is that because the transit is so slow, 29 years to traverse the whole zodiac, is that you're very likely already aware of these repetitive patterns, these karmic loops that you find yourself in relationship to money, whether that's overspending or working really hard on something that is a trend to find that it doesn't work out for you, whether that is not paying yourself first, whether that's undervaluing your services or your offerings, or whether that is partnering up with people who don't have the same values as you. All these things that end up diminishing your return on investment. You're very likely aware of this pattern, and you may even be likely aware of the root of this pattern from your childhood conditioning, about whether that's people pleasing, lack mentality, fear of not enough, fear overall. For the most part, that'll cover most of it. But because Saturn has to do with timing and karmic loops and all this kind of thing, is that you already know. And so what are you going to do about it? That's the question he's going to ask you, is what shifts, what little unsexy shifts are you going to make that you can really turn the ship to get the wind in your sails, so to speak. So one of the things that I would suggest in order to recalibrate the sense of mind, body and spirit so that you can start working in integrity is to have a look at this idea of output, input, and the space between. So output would be what you're spending money on, what you're investing your time into, what you're verbally saying about money, what your focus is on, where you spend your energy, basically. Input would be what you're taking in about money and what you have taken in about money. So who you listen to about finances, what reports you're reading, what subscriptions you're receiving that are telling you certain things that are inducing fear potentially. Input would be the beliefs that you've absorbed from your parents or from governments or from society, from media about money and how those imprints have affected your beliefs about money. So in order to determine the output and the input, we need space between those two things. And that's the most important part of this, is creating space between what you're energetically putting out and what you're energetically taking in, and letting there be white space so that you can have a look at the quality of both of these things. You could call this meditation, but it's more of a reflection, an open space. If we go back to that mind, body, and spirit diagram, this is where the superconsciousness can come in and provide us with that inspiration as to what we need to do to direct our course, how we can adjust. And those insights will come, but there needs to be space for them to come. We can't expect to be in a high beta stress mode of functioning in our consciousness, in conscious thinking, and expect to have a breakthrough as to what we should be doing. We need to slow our roll, and that's what Saturn wants us to do, is pull back a gear and have a look at things from a long-term point of view. And often you'll find that a lot of the energy that is coming at you is not for you. It doesn't resonate. It may strike a particular fear chord from that early childhood conditioning about money, or from these socially constructed ideas about where you're supposed to be. But if you really take the time and think about like whether this is going to matter to you in 4 years' time, in 6 years' time, chances are you'd be making different decisions. But until you take time to sit in the space between the stimuli, both from you and to you, then you're not going to be able to pivot and make these adjustments that are really not that hard to make, but it's just about being willing to do things differently for a little while and potentially sacrifice some immediate gratification in the short term. I kind of see Saturn energy as being in this level of a video game, and you die. You just keep dying and dying and dying because you haven't got this mastery of the technique down right. You haven't worked out the nuances of how to move or the way to go. And then when you do, you get lifted to another level. And that's what 10th house energy is when you work out the errors of your ways and you make a conscious choice to adjust them, then you get lifted to that extra level. Saturn energy to me is like this low, deep hum of 100-year-old tree. If you can imagine that, just what that would sound like, it's a really rich vibration. And when we're operating out of integrity in order to create this facade of status or success that isn't in alignment with us, it doesn't have that deep hum. It hasn't stood the test of time and worked on the lessons and integrated the energy and refined the process. It's got a really shallow ring to it. And you can tell, like you can see that in a person. So I guess it's just about asking yourself, are you willing to make the investments in yourself long term for what you view success as. And Saturn is super happy with you spending money on yourself and investing in yourself as long as it's in alignment with what is true for you. So little micro investments in education, in body care, in just your general sense of well-being, so that you're operating in a way where you feel nurtured, this kind of investment is going to pay off for you in the long term. So it's not about really restricting everything, it's just about spending and aligning your energy in a way that is really true for you. I've done recordings for each of the Saturn placements from Aries through Pisces on my website, and it just goes a bit more into the nuances of each sign and your natal placements. So if you're interested, I've linked that below, and I hope you found some value in this, and I wish you well.